So good morning, everybody. I hope many of you listening will find this a helpful talk that we have arranged by two psychologists who are experts in the field of stress management and anxiety. They're going to introduce themselves, but I just want to acknowledge them and thank them for participating in this webinar. We have Dr. Rob Fazio, who will tell you about his personal experience and what he's doing now to help people who are experiencing stress, anxiety. And Dr. Debra Roach, who is one of our own. She's a clinical psychologist who's had a long career, but works in the Women's Sports Medicine Center. I just want to say that we all are experiencing stress and anxiety right now. And those of you on the front line know that more than all of us who are working here day to day. So we really appreciate your efforts and we appreciate your time. And I hope that you'll find this talk helpful and useful. And this is just one resource in the toolbox that we've been providing. So hopefully you're aware of the other resources that are available as well, and more to come over the next week. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb to start the discussion. Deb, you might have your mic on mute. There you go.
Okay. Good to know. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Debra Roach, and I'm a counseling psychologist here at HSS, specializing in psych. It is an honor and a privilege to be speaking with you all today. When our leadership approached me about how to support our staff and address the anxiety, stress, and loss that come with the COVID-19 pandemic, I immediately knew it would be a tremendous resource to guide us not only to get through this crisis, but to grow through this crisis. Dr. Fazio and I met at Penn when I was an intern. I was his host charged with the task to help him realize that the only choice for him when he ranked his schools for match day was Penn. Our shared interest in sports psychology led us to talk about how athletes overcome tremendous barriers and adversity and perform not just well, but achieve the unimaginable. As we continued to talk that day, Rob shared that after 9/11, his family founded Hold the Door for Others, a nonprofit organization developed to inspire people to grow in healthy ways when faced with adversity. The mission of this organization syncs perfectly with what we've tried to do here at HSS as we've transitioned from orthopedic hospital to field hospital in what feels like overnight. Roles changed, and we have all had to adjust to new technology and new priorities. One of the most challenging transitions was we went from helping primarily healthy people gain movement and get back to doing what they love to helping very sick patients hopefully survive disease we know very little about. We're not used to losing patients, and suddenly we became a site where we have lost and will likely continue to lose people as we fight this battle. Mr. Shapiro talks about our climb up the mountain of COVID. We are at and in the apex now, the part that we feared most. We know you're tired, and we've all been doing this for what feels like months. And it is draining. But as Dr. Kelly reminded us, it is time for us to come together, the blue line, with a positive mindset to persevere through this and continue to do the exceptional work that is HSS. Our goal today is not minimize the challenge of this or the difficulty that we all experience in moving through, but to provide you with some information about how we psychologically respond in crisis, some tools that you can use when you're feeling overwhelmed and manage the situation, and provide some resources you can use now and as we return to our new normal. With that, I'd like to introduce you all to my good friend and the lighthouse in our storm, Dr. Fazio.
Thanks, Deb. It really is a privilege to be with you and in some way try to help walk with you through this crisis. And I think that in these times where there's so much uncertainty and ambiguity, and although we think things are starting to peak, we're really not sure exactly when we're going to be through this crisis. And I applaud all of you for all that you're doing for patients and your colleagues and your families. And I go back to what connected me first to crisis. So my dad was in the towers on September 11th, and unfortunately he didn't make it, but he was last seen holding the door for people to help them to go home. And we use that as a metaphor to help people and inspire them to not just survive after loss, but to find a way to grow through that loss and adversity. And for me, the metaphor of a bridge, many of you will find this familiar, it's the GW Bridge. I grew up in Bergen County, New Jersey, just over the bridge. And what I found really powerful is that the George Washington Bridge is the most well-traveled bridge in the world. So that connection between New Yorkers and New Jerseyans and people, and the strength that we got in the days after 9/11, I can remember flying back and forth and looking for my dad and going to the Armory. And at the time, I was getting my doctoral degree, and I went back and I had to go to a class. And I asked my professor, because I was struggling. We were looking for my dad, and then I would go back, and I wanted to continue my school because my dad donated so much time. And I said, is this about me being strong and focusing and looking for my dad, or is this going to be about feeling it and crying? And he said, both. And that message stuck with me and sticks me to this day. So you can, strength does not mean either or, it means both. So as we go through this tough time, your feelings can be a guide, and then also you have the strength and capacity to grow through the experience and be there for one another. So our hope is that throughout this webinar, when you get through it, you're going to be stronger on the other end than when you started it.
Absolutely. I think, you all have been doing so much. I know there's so many of you that are on that front line, and this is a really hard time. And I think what we're going to talk about here is just some common responses to a crisis. And a couple of things I want to say is that there is no right way. It's a lot like grief. And a lot of people have been talking about sort of the similarity between how we're dealing with this and how we deal with grief, where there is, there's so much coming in that we sometimes shut down. There's the denial and the anger and all those feelings that come up. You guys are dealing with grief when you're losing patients. That is a grief process, and it's a very difficult time. Some of the common things that we see, fear is one of the biggest things that we see during a crisis. And typically what we're really seeing is that fear of the unknown. And I think with this in particular, it's been very difficult because there's so much we don't know. It is a new virus, right? And so we're constantly changing protocols and things like that. And that can be very unsettling and very scary. Another thing, and it is common, is this feeling of helplessness, where there's, I don't know what to do, or I can't do anything, or feeling like you're stuck on the sidelines at times. And that's really hard for us as doers. At this hospital, what I'm always constantly impressed by is how everybody is always doing and working and trying to make a difference. And so when we have that feeling of helplessness, it is so consuming, because that is not something that we know what to do with. That's not generally how we live our lives. A lot of denial. Something, as we've been in the epicenter of this, and I have a lot of friends who are in different states, how I've seen this denial piece where it's kind of, before it really encroaches, there's a sense of like, it's not going to happen here, it won't affect us. It is part of that grief response, right? And so some of that is protective. It's how we process large amounts of information that are incongruous, is that we only take in small bites. And so that's, again, something that you may be feeling, and we just want to make sure you understand that's completely normal. Worry, worry is a little different than fear. What I really kind of want to talk about here is it's that what if. It's where we start snowballing and going down that road of like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And we can really find ourselves, you may even feel that kind of lift in your adrenaline and that lift in your anxiety when you start to go down that road. And that's, again, very common. And when there's so much unknown, a very, very usual thing to happen here. A lot of anger. I think that loss of control does make us angry. I think we're not real comfortable with that either. As New Yorkers, we like to be in control. We like to be driving the bus, so to speak. And I think losing that does create a lot of anger. A lot of frustration, especially for those when we were just getting started. There are so many questions about the PPE and will we have enough, the lack of testing. So, and even just the protocols changing and not having enough information is very reasonable to be frustrated. It's very reasonable to get angry with that frustration. What we try to do is find ways so that we can work through those things and allow those emotions while also not allowing them to overtake us and distract us from what we try to do. It's exhausting. A crisis literally takes everything out of us. It is very tiring to be rushed. Having those adrenaline rushes that you all are managing on the constant is exhausting. So I think giving yourself some permission that it's okay that you're worn out and that it's okay to feel that way is so, so important. Breakdowns in communication, that's going to happen. Things are changing so quickly. Just this week we changed the protocol from not needing to wear masks when we go out as the rest of us, and now that we are supposed to be doing that, and so the information changes and sometimes people get left out of that loop, and it can be, again, frustrating. But trying our best to kind of improve that breakdown, and also just understand that those things can happen, especially during this time. Lack of leadership, we've been very fortunate at HSS with Mr. Shapiro and Dr. Kelly have really done an exceptional job in their leadership, but it can still, sometimes it can still happen, or you might be thinking about some of the leadership in our country where you may have seen some people misstep, and that's going to happen. It's really common to freeze when a crisis happens, where you just get stuck. And so, you may find yourself, I know for myself, there have been moments where my leadership has not been, in my family the best, where I've definitely launched guilt grenades and things like that to kind of help my 7-year-old parents stay in the house. And I think that, understanding that that can happen, but also appreciating to get out of that frozen space and be able to move and be able to lead is an important part to get us all through this. There's 2 more I want to talk about. One is the loss of focus. I think, again, on those front lines, I can imagine when that adrenaline surge comes, it's really easy to get distracted, and it's hard to focus on the task in front of you. And that's completely normal, and there are ways that we can help you manage some of that. And it's okay to take a step back, and to recognize that you might need a second. That's okay. There's no shame in that at all. The last one I want to mention, some might be feeling numb. You might feel like, I'm not feeling anything. And a lot of these things, the reason that we see these common reactions in crisis is because some of them are protective. Being angry puts us in a position of power a lot of times. Being numb allows us to do some of these really, really difficult, impossible things and almost be separate from the process of doing it. And so I want you to know, even if we didn't touch on some of the things, that anything that this is new. It's a new novel coronavirus, right? And so anything that you're experiencing is okay. It is normal because this is something that we don't, have a lot of experience with. Is there anything you want to add there, Rob?
No, I think you hit all the key points, and what I would say is that these are the typical responses to crisis, and yes, they are okay. And what we're going to invite you to do is to have some of the non-typical responses to crisis, which is making sure that you're getting stronger and growing as we go. So back to it's both. So having these feelings and then finding the strength to continue to work and move forward and be focused. Dr. Kelly did a great job this morning, and then in preparation for this, I was talking with Deb, and I saw one of his presentations talking about the hospital, and quite frankly, he does a really good job and is on target from what we need from our leaders, which is letting everyone know in some way, shape, or form, we're all in a leadership role. There's so much anxiety out there, and we need to combat the anxiety by stockpiling positive experiences. So anxiety, we know that is the most common mental illness in the United States. Approximately 40 million Americans, adults, have anxiety disorders. In a time like this, anxiety is heightened because all the key factors are there: lack of control, not sure when this is ending. When we talk about 9/11 and compare it there, that was an acute crisis. This is a consistent crisis. So it's more important for us to be aware of ourselves and each other and where we are as far as our emotional capacity and what we need. So flatten the anxiety curve is all about doing things actively to decrease your anxiety levels and stress. We're trying to prevent burnout as much as possible. And the way to do that is to focus on intentional growth. Doing things that help you grow gives your brain a break from the crisis and helps you up. And when you develop new pathways in your brain, it'll follow your lead. So if you are focused on doing things to help yourself grow, you will your mind will notice that more and more. So for example, we recommend 15 minutes a day doing one of these things. Learn, laugh, love. Very simple, but very effective. Something like learning something new, figuring out something that you always want to do and haven't done before. Emotion is just as contagious as the COVID-19 virus. So meaning that if you create positive experience, if you laugh with your colleagues, you elevate people's emotional capacity, and that gives us a break. Humor is the closest connection between two human beings. It also then buffers your stress level and gives you a reset. And then love, there's self-love, and there's loving others, taking care of others, but doing things that create that cycle of positivity. Also, strengths that you have. If you're good at something and you enjoy it, teach someone else that as well. We're going to need a break from the consistent media coverage of this. We need to take breaks, and we have to be intentional. So doing things like that, and then making this part of your day, right? Asking one of your colleagues, hey, did you do any learn, laugh, love last night? I know in my family, my wife and I, we have a 4-year-old, and my daughter used to take gymnastics, so obviously she can't take class, and she decided that she's going to teach us gymnastics. So I had to learn how to do a cartwheel the other day, but I actually didn't move, so I don't know how well that went. But just those moments of levity, and then we posted it on social media for our friends to see, and it has that cyclical effect and gives us a break. We're going to talk when we get a little bit towards the end there around some resources and stuff that you see on the bottom there of other intentional things that you can do to flatten this anxiety curve with growth.
So a lot, I'm sure you've heard a lot, this one expression has been definitely bouncing around a lot, is control the controllables. I know Dr. Kelly's used it, and it is a really good way to sort of take back when you're feeling that loss of control. So what we're going to do here is, and I think for a lot of you this is maybe very relevant, it's kind of, you're wearing two hats. You're in the hospital, and you're wearing the hat there of being on that front line and helping all our patients, and then you have to transition and go home at night or in the morning and be mom, dad, sibling, daughter in that role. And that's a really hard switch. So I'm going to start kind of talking about in the hospital, like what kinds of things can we do? And so one of the things is focus over fear. So when we're in these situations, we can freeze. It's a natural thing that can happen, and time will stop. And so how do you hit that start button? How do you hit the play button again? And so what we want to do is kind of restart that physiological. So when you're coming through, when you looked at that flattening that anxiety curve, when you're coming up into that adrenaline rush, sometimes it can be helpful to reboot your physiological system. I know Laura Robbins was saying that they're putting some cold compresses on the floor so that you can kind of switch that physiological, and that can be a really good way to kind of reset. Another thing to think of is, I'm a sports psychologist, and that's a big part of what I do in my practice, is thinking about baseball players. When they go up at bat, a lot of times they'll step out of the batter's box and compose themselves and then go back in. Derek Jeter was amazing at this. Captain Clutch would go in and be able to do that with 2 guys on base. We're in the bottom of the 10th, and he would bring it all home for us. And being able to make those shifts and to give yourself that space to do that is tremendous when you're being barraged by all this input. It's a lot of stimulation coming in. Another thing that we use a lot in sports psych is what we call cue word. And so one of my favorites for this, and a lot of times I use with my athletes, is calm and ready. And so when I'm going into things or when I'm working with my athletes, it's kind of like, how do you mentally prepare to get in there, and you're calm and ready. And just by saying those words to yourself, it helps bring that arousal level down so that you're able to really focus on what's right in front of you. Another thing that can be really helpful is a guiding image, a metaphor, a song, a saying. So a guiding image, one thing that came to mind to me today is sort of when this is over, what are you going to do? What's that going to look like? That may be the thing that you hold on to. There may be a photo that you hold on to that's of your family that keeps you centered during this. For me, sometimes, as a small business owner and as a one-time marathoner, for me, when I'm working on these things, a lot of times I'm a big Eminem fan, and the song that I would focus on is "Success is my only option, failure's not." And that can be a lot of pressure, which is not my intention with that, but just sort of realizing that anything that you guys are doing is helping. and starting to understand that, like, that is tremendous. Next thing is self-statements that strengthen. So some of this can be, you know, I'm strong, I'm doing my best. You know, when you're faced in such difficult things, it can be hard to remember that here you are doing your best and you're doing things that we need. Another part, you know, I think Mr. Shapiro talked about is sort of thinking about this as a marathon, right? And so instead of looking 30 days out, we're looking 3. You know, it's sort of like, I'm not going to look at the 26 miles. I'm looking at the next lamppost I'm going to run to, and I'm going to run to the end of the bridge, and then I'm going to run to the next spot. You're only looking small bites ahead to make it much more manageable. And then building up others. Just like Rob was saying, that small connection with each other really, and you guys know it best. I mean, they've been talking a lot about when we discharge a COVID patient that you guys set up a line and you applaud them out. And that, you get it. That is the stuff that person is leaving and feels the love and compassion you guys have given them as they walk out. And that is exactly it. And do that for each other as well. And again, not trying to add to your plate, but just those small things make a tremendous, tremendous difference. I'm going to shift gears here a bit and start talking about the at-home. So as you transition into home, you know, when you're kind of trying to do this, it can be really hard because you're going from 100 miles an hour and you're trying to slow down a bit because this is your opportunity to recoup and recover. So the first thing we're kind of encourage you to do is do a quick scan, a body scan in terms of the physiological, like where are you in terms of your physical and arousal levels in that way, emotional, are you tired, are you frustrated, are you angry? Getting a sense of that before you kind of walk into that setting gives you the power to be able to address those things in your downtime. Getting some opportunity for relaxing. You know, there's 2 kinds of things for stress management. There's active stress management and passive. The active things are things you actively do to kind of help yourself relax. So sometimes you may be coming off a shift and you're feeling really revved up and jazzed, and so you might need to go do some physical activity or lift some weights or something that's going to help you actively release that. You might need the passive, which is turn your brain off, which is also a very, very vital thing to be able to do. But you kind of doing that recognition and doing that body scan helps you figure out what's going to be my best tactic to be able to relax on this end. You know, I know we're all telling you this, and it can be really hard. I know you're seeing some very difficult things. Getting some rest, getting some sleep is going to help you to be able to do this. It can be hard. What I kind of emphasize with that is that if you can't fall asleep, that's okay. Just kind of take some rest, maybe close your eyes. If you have that pet, you know, they can be very helpful in kind of helping you just settle down and recharge a bit. Recharging your emotional battery. So take a second and think about what fills you up. So it's not going to be the same for all of us. I mean, I think the hard part about psychology is that there's not like a one thing fits all kind of. So when you go back, is it fueling your battery in a way of like you need nutrition? Is it fueling your battery in a way of I need to connect with my family or friends? You might be taking a step back and not isolating, but just kind of taking that step back. You need a little quiet to fill up your battery. So you may need that yoga class or that meditation or just to get a shower and kind of reset. Reconnecting with what you enjoy. So this can be, you know, again, like family, friends, but it can also be things that you forgot about that when you were a kid you used to love to do. It's been really interesting to me watching a lot of people get reconnected with games, just things that they haven't done for a long time that they're finding brings them that joy when we're in these times of stress. And the last one, this ready yourself, I kind of put it in both columns of the at home and at the hospital. You wear 2 hats, right? So you got your blue team at HSS, and then you got your home team hat when you go home. And so what I do with a lot of my athletes is we do a pregame routine. So no matter what arena we're going to be in, they have this thing that they can always go to that kind of helps center them, regardless of where they're playing, that this is something that I can consistently rely on and help them get their head in the right space. And so I think as you go into the hospital, what are the things that you need to do to focus on for that? What's your pregame routine? And it can be things like taking those diaphragmatic breaths, or there's some box breathing, some things you guys can definitely look at. We can give you some resources for that. It can also just be those cue words kind of help you get your mindset calm and ready. And then when you switch to home, it may be something that's a little bit more, you know, focused on you and focused on your family. And so giving yourself the time and space to be able to do those things. The other part that I want to say before we get to what works in both is cut yourself a break. You know, what you're doing is really hard. And so you've got to give yourself the space and forgiveness of like, all right, so I'm going to try again tomorrow, and that's okay. The one thing, a lot of the research when we look at how people come through crisis is resilience. And there's one thing that I can say about New Yorkers is that you are resilient and that you are stronger than you know, and that is going to serve you well when you come through this. I think another big piece, and we talk a lot about this, and Rob will talk about it more in the next couple slides, is keeping that sense of humor and being able to see that like that laughter it is a release for our system, and it does a lot to help us feel better. You know, just like crying is like those things do help us feel better, and it is something that makes us get through the tough times. You know, it may not feel like it, but you do have what it takes to get through this. You know, all of the things, all the feedback that we've been getting this morning is just about how quickly you guys have been learning, how fast you've been able to implement all these new things, and just the strength that you've shown. And so I'm hoping you're hearing that from more than just me, because that is absolutely, you are doing those things, and you have what it takes to get through this. When we flatten that anxiety, the body will follow. So if you're able to reset, or even just take the adrenaline bump from that 10 to like a 7, everything starts to slow down a bit, and it gets a little easier to do what you're trying to do. And then it doesn't have that wear on you where you're so exhausted by it. And I know we hit this a lot, and I do want to hammer it home. Every positive experience you create gives people a break. You know, having those positive connections, connecting with each other that way, and I know you guys are doing it from all the things I'm hearing, it really does make a difference to each other. It helps boost you up, and it really does help you all get where you're going.
I've been thinking a lot about this in working with hospitals for the last few years, and doing a lot of shadowing of surgeries, and ranging from children's hospitals to adult hospitals. And what I really learned is the value of nurses and PAs. I was somewhat ignorant to the emotional connection they have to patients, so I knew that intuitively, but I didn't really see how much they did in the setups for surgery, the actual talking to patients, really the foundation for the team and the success. So for you to be strong is so important, because it's just that analogy of building a house. The foundation needs to be the strongest part. And the reason I share that with you is I also think that you have the most vulnerability because you're so connected to the people side. And I think a lot of our surgeons and docs, their vulnerability is the role identity shift and the transition of not having control and being able to do something. So just be aware of our different potential vulnerabilities, and then how we're going to be able to address those and play in different roles. Leadership is so critical in this time, and whether or not you have people reporting to you, we're all leaders. Think of leadership as influence, and the more we set a tone and create a climate that is more engaging as opposed to anxiety-provoking, the better the positive ripple effect is. And when you lead, the first thing you have to do is start with yourself. Everyone talks about self-awareness, but many people don't get it right. I'm literally talking about being aware of what energizes you, what drains you, what time of day do you have the most energy, what types of things are going to pull on your heartstrings, right? That being prepared of what I call grabbers. If someone's potentially passing away, is that going to remind you of a loved one that did pass away? Being aware ahead of time, and similar to Deb is saying, that pre-game routine. And if you think you have a vulnerability, trying to work through that, or talking with someone, and figuring out what resources that Laura has provided that you can do, because we know that when a crisis happens, if we're aware of the potential impact and we build some resources, it has less intensity on us and does less damage to us. So that awareness is critical. The stronger you are, the more you can lead, the less anxiety there is, the stronger our immune system is, the better we help our colleagues and ourselves and our families. seeing the situation. So Dr. Kelly did a great job of talking about the future of the business, and Dr. Padgett talked about current state and future state. It's clear to me that HSS gets it, where on the other end of this, we want to have grown. So figuring out what the situation is for the hospital, what's the reintegration going to be like, for you once you get through that. Sometimes taking a break and thinking about the future in a positive way and what you're learning and growing gives you a little bit of relief. So obviously in the moments you have to focus, but sometimes good conversations are, what can I control, what can't I control, and we focus on the can controls. We know that the style in which you communicate has a big impact on people's behaviors, and different situations call for different styles. I think the calm, confident style is one of the most important. So you can be clear and kind. You can demonstrate and communicate urgency and do that in a calculated and non-emotional way. So thinking of which of these styles is your typical, and then making sure you adjust. If you don't have one of these other styles, right, in your tool bag right now, toolkit, then ask someone to help you out, and maybe you partner on certain communications. I also think reflection is important. So you notice that there are questions for each of these that are good to reflect upon to help prepare you for this. And then tapping into people's motivational currency. So all of us have drivers inside of us, and we typically have a primary driver. So someone who's very performance-oriented wants to get things done. Someone who's people-oriented wants there to be harmony in relationships. So realizing where you are, and if you're in a leadership role, making sure you're tapping to all these different currencies and not just what your primary motivator is. So really being strategic and intentional about that. And then going for growth. So start to write that growth story, right? What did we learn that we didn't know before? How did we grow as a team, right? What new appreciation do I have? What opportunities are there? What do I want to teach others? Just those reflective questions. The Dalai Lama had a great quote, and he said, you can't know joy unless you know tragedy, right? No one wants a crisis, but it is an opportunity to become stronger and grow. And look, what we know about New Yorkers, it's unique. New Yorkers are just naturally, maybe it's something in the Hudson, but we're just, I'm a New Jersey, and I say we as New York because it's kind of an extension. I get in trouble for that sometimes. Apologize, bridge and tunnel. But I think that it's just naturally there, and stockpiling positive experiences becomes an incubator for stress and gives us a break. So keep focusing and thinking about that growth. Over the last 18 years, we've been working on looking at the research on what buffers the damage of crisis and trauma. So physically and psychologically, what buffers the impact of crisis and trauma, and then what leads you to growth. So we thought that after 9/11 that surviving just wasn't enough. How can we take this a step further? So growth became one of our mantras. And these are 8 resources. We have a self-awareness tool that people can take, and you see where you are weak, strong, or have a really strong strength in these areas. And you use what we call a growth guide, where you can learn different activities and ways to build yourself up. And then taking it a step further, where you support others. You don't need to be a psychologist to help people grow, right? Obviously, if someone is experiencing extreme anxiety or depression and you notice those signs, you want to reach out to Laura and get your support. But this process of Connect, Care, Challenge, just in peer conversations or working with your colleagues, helps you get to those other 8 resources. So if you notice that someone, day after day really is being negative, understandably so, having a conversation, letting them know you're on the same team, and then talking about some of these things, talking about, okay, you know what? Every day we're going to pick learn, laugh, or love, and we're all going to share what we're going to do. Just shifting the focus from loss and crisis to growth has a really big impact. I just want to reinforce here that it's a people-first approach that starts with you, and you can create a cycle of strength the more that you're intentional about building your self-reliance. And we realize that this is a high-pressure time and that you're tired, but we guarantee you that if you do some of these active strategies, it'll actually decrease your fatigue and you'll have more energy. I'm going to turn it over to Deb to close us out before we get to questions.
I think, again, here it is. Okay. It's, first off, thank you all for everything that you're doing. And I think really just taking care of yourself is going to help you take care of everybody else. One of the big things that we stress in psychology is that, we're not real helpful unless we're making sure we're taking care of ourselves first. It's that analogy we all talk about on the airplane where you put your own mask on first before you help the person sitting next to you. And I think really keeping that in mind as you guys are in this really tough stretch, to take care of yourself, to do the things that are going to help you to do that, and focus on how we can help you moving forward. So I think we have some question and answer part here.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Deb Roche and Rob Fazio for that presentation. And I'm just going to ask Peter, who's online there, do we have any questions that have come in, Peter?
So far, no questions. For anyone who might be viewing the presentation, feel free to join the Chatzy room and ask some questions. There is a bit of a lag in us receiving the questions, but if you start entering those questions, we'll be happy to take any of them.
Right. And I'll throw out one, and I know, Deb, you said this, and Rob, and I heard this at the lecture this morning with the physicians. Can you just maybe again emphasize, especially for the people who are on the front lines, the nurses, the PAs, the PTs are at the bedside, patients are coming in, it's frenetic and hard to find that time to take a step back. Can you just repeat again what your recommendations are when they're in that frenetic pace and yet we're asking them to take time for themselves?
I mean, I think it is, right, where it's that impossible balance between these two things of taking care of yourself while also having to take care of everybody else. And I think there are small things you can do, and I know Steve's on the front line there, and he has some great suggestions as well, but some of the things that just kind of reset that arousal system so when we do peak out that we're able to reset it. So the idea that there's going to be some cold compresses on site, doing the box breathing and diaphragmatic breathing can be really helpful. Stepping out of the batter's box, that's one of my big ones too, and really just one thing at a time. Really focusing on one task at a time and being able to take that breath and just sort of remind yourself, I can do this, and just focus on what's right in front of you. I add to that, Rob. I'm sure you have.
Sure. I think that one of the most important things that you can do is prevention. So if you're doing active relaxation, imagery, deep breathing, saying these things to yourself, I'm strong, I can handle this, 20 minutes a day outside of the hospital, the next day you will have more energy. So you want to be continuing to do that. And then in the moment, there's some simple things where you think of, okay, can I have, I know I have an intentional 5-minute break, right? And when you can do that when it's appropriate. Or simple things like having a little, like a rubber band around your wrist. I'm not sure if you're able to do something like that or not, but if you're not with the patient, but just as a little reminder to yourself that you are strong. Sometimes people write a word on there that reminds them of strong, love, right? We got this. Something that you have there that is a reminder. It can even be a color. Having Post-its behind the desk where the staff are, where you're sending stuff to each other. It says, hey, Steve, you're strong. Susie, you're great at this. Consistent positive reminders all over the place that patients don't have to see, but give you that moment of reconnection to who you know that you are and what you love and enjoy and are passionate about.
Peter, do we have any questions?
So far, no questions, but perhaps I could throw a question out there. And maybe this question could be focused on some of the leaders within the institution. as you said, everybody is handling the crisis differently and at different paces. Sometimes you have staff who, very well-meaning, 90% of them really get it and are rolling with the punches. And then there's staff that sometimes they're just overwhelmed, they're anxious, they don't know how to put that first foot forward. So from a leadership perspective, how do we best support them? How do we best engage that group?
I'm going to have Rob start on this one.
I think that there has to be space for conversations with people that are struggling. So early and often intervention. So if someone is struggling, whether you're overwhelmed or anxious, I think you want to address that as soon as possible, touch base with them, asking them how they're doing, getting them some additional resources but it's a combination of being understanding and also trying to reconnect them to their strength. And it doesn't always have to be on the leader. Let's say there's some people that are just naturally built, right? There's nature and nurture. So we want to nurture the nature. And those people that are naturally resilient and strong, have a group of those people that are your champions that are going to partner with people and try to help them through. But conversation is your best tool to helping these people. Again, you don't want them to feel bad about this because a lot of people aren't prepared for it and it's not their role. But you do want to help elevate them and walk with them throughout this.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we have no other questions, I just want to, again, thank you both. This is one piece of the broad support that we're trying to offer all of you on the front line. You've heard the name Steve. If you haven't met him, Steve Forte is, we do have a question.
Yes,
okay, well, let me finish my thought. Steve Forte is a crisis management expert we brought on who is on the front line, who is there to try to help people take that step back and has a lot of experience in that. And then there are a bunch of other resources that you should have received, the laminated sheet that has resources that are confidential, hotlines, as well as counseling. So next question.
So actually, that was a great lead-in for this question. This question comes from Colin, who says, thank you so much for the presentation. Is there a Perfect Serve group that we can contact to help us manage staff who really need more emotional support during this time?
Great question, Colin. So on Perfect Serve, right at the top, before you get to all of the alphabet there, it does say COVID, I think it says COVID-19 resources is something to the effect, and that's being built out so that whoever's on can go to Perfect Serve, and there'll be a tree that's being triaged to get you somebody that would help. I believe it's in the works. I know there was a little glitches the other day, but it should be functional. I don't know, is it functional right now, Jennifer? It's called Crisis Management and Wellness Support, Crisis Management Wellness Support. And when you click on that, we're trying to have different resources for the residents and the clinicians to click on, and most importantly, who you would contact if you realize someone might need additional support. And so it's being built out. And in addition to that, Steve Forte is here 24/7. He is also on Perfect Serve, and he's helping us to triage support right now. A great question. Anything else, Peter?
That's it.
Great. Thanks, Colin. So again, thank you all. This is being recorded, and we will push out the link today for anybody that didn't have the opportunity to see it. So thank you to our speakers and to everybody who listened, and everybody, please be safe.